So,
Okay. Okay, joined by Chris Douglas right now, and we talked to him before about things, and he's been so right on a lot of different things we talked about. And I want to talk to him about this. The headline I've been seeing, and this headline on Reuters: Biden administration issues rule that could curb gig work and contracting. That was back in January. But what does this mean exactly? Because there's a lot of people that could be impacted, apparently.
so there's this question: if you're doing work, are you an employee of a firm, or are you your own employee as an independent contractor, basically working for yourself? So the classic example of an independent contractor is someone who drives for Uber or drives for Lyft, or perhaps delivers groceries for, say, Shipt or something like that. So if you're driving for Uber, you set your own hours, you have your own car, it's your choice if you work or not. So it seems pretty straightforward that an Uber driver, for instance, would be an independent contractor. You're working for yourself. And then Uber
Yeah.
takes a cut because you're using their app to book the rides. But being an independent contractor, is it popular with certain special interests, if you will, because an independent contractor means that you can't join a union. So there's this push by the Biden administration to be the most pro union president in history. So if you can make people become employees rather than independent contractors, that allows them to join a labor union, as well as other things. So independent contractors aren't bound by federal labor law, federal labor regulations, things like the minimum wage, things like just employer or employee protections for discrimination. Also, if you're an independent contractor, you have to pay the self-employment tax.
Yeah.
Like Social Security taxes aren't withheld from your paycheck. You have to pay both the employer and the employee share of the Social Security tax. So really, when you're an independent contractor, you're self-employed.
Yeah. So is this a rule? Is this a law? What is this gone into place? I mean, I see the word rule. Sometimes I get confused. What does rule mean?
So rule, as far as I can tell, just means law. It's a law
Okay.
that's not passed by Congress. It's just a law that is set by some federal bureaucracy. I
Okay.
presume the Department of Labor, but employees and employers have to obey it just like the law. So it becomes a gray area. Are you an independent contractor versus an employee? I don't think it's such a gray area for Uber, although in California, I believe an election or two ago, there was a ballot initiative that would classify Uber drivers as employees of Uber rather than independent contractors. So
Wow.
what this rule does is it makes it more difficult for someone to be classified as an independent contractor versus an employee. So under the old rule, there's like three different sets of criteria that you'd have to satisfy to be an independent contractor. And now there's upwards of six different criteria that you have to satisfy in order to be considered to be an independent contractor. So if it's more difficult to be an independent contractor, well, then it's more likely someone becomes an employee and then has the ability to say, like, join a union and do all the other things that an employee can do, but an independent contractor can't.
But in the situation, as I see it, as just a common person, a journalist and an average person. But if you're the Uber, you maybe can't take on that many employees. I mean, that's what makes Uber and companies like that, I'm just my opinion, work because you can have so many different, contractors, independent contractors, someone who wants to work one shift a week and do something like that, especially like in California. So is it actually maybe limiting, is it hurting the consumer by not providing that service as much? Because it's limiting for the company, it sounds like it could be.
And it could be limiting for the drivers too, or the independent
Yeah.
contractors too, because the big benefit of gig work from the standpoint of the independent contractor is you set your own hours, you choose when you want to work, how often you want to work. Whereas if you're an employee, you might have to work a particular shift and you lose that flexibility. So it's like anything, there's a trade-off. Sure, if you're an independent contractor, maybe you lose some protections that employees would have. But if you're an independent contractor, really you're working for yourself, not a firm. So it's up to you in terms of how often and how much you work. You really have that flexibility, which I think more and more workers are valuing in the post-COVID world.
Yeah. And that is, and I've met Uber and DoorDash and people who, just do it one day a week or whatever. But what is this going to mean, especially like in California, or if it goes nationwide? What does it mean for the companies themselves? I mean, they can't take on 30,000 new full-time employees, I would imagine financially it just wouldn't work maybe for them.
So my guess is that if you're a big company with a massive amount of resources like an Uber or like a Lyft, you'll have the resources to navigate the new cumbersome regulations so that your workers could still be classified as an independent contractor. Who this will likely hurt will be smaller or mid-sized businesses that rely on independent contractors who don't have the resources to navigate these new 6 federal criteria that workers have to satisfy to be classified as an independent contractor. So, oftentimes with the case of regulations like this, the large corporations are unaffected. They have the resources to navigate it. It's the small to medium-sized businesses who don't have those resources that are put at a competitive disadvantage. It's kind of like we saw during the pandemic where there was a shutdown. If you're a massive corporation like Amazon, you could thrive during it. You have the resources to adapt to the economy being shut down and having to make deliveries and so forth. Whereas if you're a small to mid-sized retailer, you might have went out of business.
Yeah, in Michigan here, for example, I know a lot of restaurant owners, they went out of business, but the big chains, they went through it, they were fine. So once again, hurting small business, really, that's what it could end up doing, and small business has been hurt enough over the past 3, 4 years.
Right, hurts small business and it hurts the workers who work for those small businesses because a lot of gig workers probably want to stay as independent contractors, work a shift here and there. You have some free time, make some extra money. If you're a college student, maybe you drive Uber a night or two a week for some extra money. Right? No one's forcing these independent contractors to work these gig jobs. So if they're voluntarily choose to work these gig jobs, that would suggest that this is the best alternative for them compared to all the other alternatives they could be doing. So if the federal government takes that ability away from them, that would force them into something that is worse from their perspective.
Last question. I know you're not a lawyer and I have access to lawyers, but since it's not done by Congress and it's a quote rule, have these things been challenged before? Like similar rules, and has the courts gotten involved and overturned not this, but other things, or could be this?
Well, this is America. You can sue anyone for anything. So,
Well,
sure,
true.
it's likely that this will prompt a lawsuit if there are a lot of like you have to be a pretty large corporation to have the resources to even file this lawsuit.
Yeah.
Although maybe an organization like the Chamber of Commerce would file a lawsuit on behalf of its membership. That's a possibility. But yeah, if this rule becomes cumbersome for businesses, I think there is a likelihood that there'll be a lawsuit filed to try to get an injunction to prevent this new regulation from taking effect.
One more thing, separate topic. I woke up this morning, had the headlines. Inflation. Is it what type of? And there's different sorts of inflation, but what went up this morning? I saw the number 0.6%, and then it's going up. What went up this morning? What
So
was
this
it?
is
What was announced?
so this is wholesale price inflation. So the prices that retailers are paying to purchase their goods to carry their stores. So like if you're a grocery store, wholesale prices are what you pay to get the groceries that you put on your shelf. So if there's wholesale price inflation, that would suggest that in the future there'll be retail price inflation as retail stores pass on those higher prices to consumers via higher prices. So what's disconcerting is that at the end of 2023, a lot of policymakers thought that inflation was falling. By 2024, we'll be back to the Federal Reserve's 2% target. We've had 3 straight consumer price inflation readings that are higher than expected, where inflation is being at 3% or higher. And now with wholesale price inflation being higher than expected, that would suggest that while moving into the first half of 2024, inflation is remaining hot. It's not falling back to the Federal Reserve's 2% target.
Wow. And is that still? And you've said it before. An economist on the left and the right had said it's all the money that was pumped into the system, right? And that's what started it all, and it's
Right.
continuing.
Yeah, it's continuing. The money supply growth isn't what it was during the pandemic, where the Federal Reserve doubled the money supply, but the Federal Reserve has backed off on restricting the money supply and increasing interest rates. They haven't increased interest rates since either summer or fall of last year. And really, what drives inflation is spending. That there's just all the spending in the economy that's outpacing the production of goods and services. And you look at where the spending is taking place, it's taking place at the federal level, where we have an economy with a below 4% unemployment rate, where the federal government is still running a $1.5 trillion budget deficit. So it's just pumping massive amounts of spending, and an economy, for all intents and purposes, is at full employment. That's just the traditional recipe for inflation. And it doesn't look like that spending is falling anytime soon, where the budget proposed by the administration a couple of weeks ago is proposing about $7.6 trillion worth of federal spending next year. So it's the spending that's driving inflation, so long as we have massive amounts of federal spending, a Federal Reserve that is complacent in not aggressively increasing interest rates, and a massive budget deficit. I would expect inflation to continue to run hot.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Myself, the viewers learned so much from you. I just thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always great to talk to you, Dave. So hope to talk to you